My temper flares, but it's often my heart screaming when words alone cannot express my feelings. I have a bad temper. Yet I've realized that anger is just passion misdirected, waiting to be understood. My temper is loud, but beneath it lies vulnerability that only the closest can ever truly see. I have a bad temper, but it's taught me boundaries and the courage to stand up for myself. My anger can overwhelm, yet it is proof that I feel everything intensely, refusing to numb myself. I have a bad temper, but each flare reminds me that my emotions are valid and deserve attention. My temper can erupt, but it's also a signal that let's slow down, reflect, and reconnect with what matters. I have a bad temper, yet every outburst has taught me humility and the power of apology. My anger is sharp, but it's also my way of defending what I love most. I have a bad temper, but I am learning to turn its energy into strength, not destruction. My temper is fiery, yet it coexists with kindness that quietly nurtures those who stay close. I have a bad temper, and I've learned that patience is the bridge between anger and understanding. My anger is intense, but it's also a reflection of my deep sensitivity to injustice. I have a bad temper, yet it reminds me daily that I am human, flawed, and always evolving. My temper can burn, but it also illuminates my unwavering devotion to the people I love. I have a bad temper, yet it forces me to confront my fears and insecurities head-on. My anger sometimes isolates me, but it also filters out those who don't belong in my life. I have a bad temper, but it has taught me the importance of reflection, growth, and self-awareness. My temper flares, yet it is a signal that I care deeply, more than I sometimes know how to show. I have a bad temper, but every outburst is a lesson in restraint, empathy, and conscious communication. My anger can be overwhelming, but it's rooted in love, loyalty, and unwavering principles. I have a bad temper, yet I've realized that its intensity can become my greatest teacher. My temper is a storm, yet every storm clears the path for growth and clarity afterward. I have a bad temper, but it has helped me recognize the value of calm and inner peace. My anger is loud, yet my love, compassion, and forgiveness are even louder when I choose them. I have a bad temper, but each flare forces me to evaluate my life, my choices, and my relationships. My temper can erupt, yet it is balanced by the quiet strength of understanding and patience. I have a bad temper, but it reminds me that expressing my feelings is healthier than burying them. My anger may be strong, yet my capacity to heal, forgive, and grow is stronger. I have a bad temper, but every flare is a call to examine myself and improve continuously. Fierce, yet it is softened by love, reflection, and the willingness to change. I have a bad temper, yet it reveals my authenticity. I feel deeply, and I do not hide it. My anger can push people away, but it also attracts those willing to understand my heart. I have a bad temper, yet I've learned that apology is not weakness, but courage and growth. My temper flares, but every flare teaches me patience, compassion, and emotional resilience. I have a bad temper, but it has made me aware of who truly respects my boundaries. My anger is intense, yet it coexists with a love that is steadfast and unwavering. I have a bad temper, yet it has taught me that emotional honesty is more important than approval. My temper is like fire, yet even fire can bring warmth, light, and renewal when guided wisely. I have a bad temper, but it has helped me embrace both my vulnerabilities and my strengths. But it also draws those who value authenticity above all else. I have a bad temper, yet it has taught me the importance of self-control and reflection. My temper can erupt, yet it reminds me to breathe, pause, and think before reacting. You know, my anger is a loud heartbeat, proof that I am alive, passionate, and unafraid to feel. I have a bad temper, yet I've realized that growth comes from understanding, not suppressing emotions. My temper is intense, but it has shown me the value of forgiveness, both for myself and others. I have a bad temper, yet it is a teacher showing me the difference between reaction and response. My anger may flare, but it never erases my capacity for love, empathy, and connection. I have a bad temper, yet each flare challenges me to become more self-aware and compassionate. My temper is fierce, but it reminds me to nurture calmness, patience, and emotional wisdom. I have a bad temper, yet I've learned that anger is only as powerful as the control I exercise. I have a bad temper, but it's just my heart refusing to stay silent when it's hurt. My temper is fierce, yet it teaches me to value calm, reflection, and emotional growth. I have a bad temper, but every flare reminds me that I care more than most people notice. My anger may erupt. I have a bad temper, yet I've learned that acknowledging it is the first step toward healing. My temper is loud, but it's often a cry for understanding and connection. I have a bad temper, but it has taught me the value of patience and self-awareness. My anger can scare people, but it also reveals the depth of my emotions. I have a bad temper, yet it's proof that I refuse to hide my true feelings. My temper flares, but it reminds me to protect my heart and my peace. I have a bad temper, but it's a signal that something in me cares deeply and demands attention. My anger is intense, yet it coexists with compassion that often goes unseen. I have a bad temper, yet it forces me to examine my life, my triggers, and my responses. My temper can erupt, but it has taught me that restraint is a form of strength. I have a bad temper. My anger can burn bright, yet it always fades when I remember what truly matters. I have a bad temper, yet it has taught me how important boundaries are in life. My temper flares, but it also illuminates the people and values I hold most dear. I have a bad temper, yet every outburst has shown me the power of reflection and growth. My anger is loud, but my capacity to forgive is louder and stronger. My temper is a fire, yet even fire can be controlled to provide warmth, not destruction. I have a bad temper, yet it reminds me that feeling deeply is not a weakness, but a gift. My anger can push people away, but it also draws those who truly understand me. I have a bad temper, yet I've learned that every flare is an opportunity to grow and evolve. My temper can overwhelm, but it teaches me self-awareness, patience, and emotional resilience. I have a bad temper, yet it's a reminder that I am alive, passionate, and fiercely authentic. My anger is visible, but so is my ability to apologize, reflect, and change. I have a bad temper, yet each outburst reminds me of the value of calm and understanding. My temper flares, but it never shadows my capacity for love, empathy, and loyalty. I have a bad temper, yet it is a teacher guiding me toward better communication and patience. My anger is powerful, but so is my willingness to learn from it and grow. I have a bad temper, yet it has shown me that honesty in emotion is more valuable than silence. My temper can erupt, but it's always a sign of care and attention that cannot be ignored. I have a bad temper, yet it teaches me to distinguish between what's worth reacting to and what's not. My anger may flare, but it's never permanent. It fades when I reflect and breathe. I have a bad temper, yet it reveals how deeply I feel and how passionately I live. My temper is fierce, yet my ability to forgive, reflect, and grow is even stronger. I have a bad temper, but it's a part of me learning how to balance passion with patience. My anger is loud, but it also signals where my heart and soul care the most. I have a bad temper, yet it reminds me that emotions are guides, not enemies. My temper flares, but it teaches me to respect myself and the boundaries I need to survive. I have a bad temper, yet every flare has led me to greater self-awareness and emotional wisdom. My anger may intimidate, but it also attracts those who value honesty and authenticity. I have a bad temper, yet I've learned that self-control is the bridge between reaction and reflection. My temper is like a storm, yet storms pass, leaving clarity and calm behind. I have a bad temper, but it has taught me to communicate my needs more clearly. My anger is real, but it is always intertwined with love, care, and loyalty. I have a bad temper, yet it reminds me that feeling deeply is a strength, not a flaw. My temper flares, but it forces me to examine my life, values, and relationships honestly. I have a bad temper, yet it teaches me patience, reflection, and the art of emotional balance. My anger is fierce, but my desire to grow, forgive, and love is fiercer. I have a bad temper, yet every outburst is an invitation to understand myself better. My temper can erupt, but it is tempered by my commitment to self-growth and empathy. I have a bad respects me and who drifts away when tested. My anger may scare, yet it also clarifies what is worth fighting for in life. I have a bad temper, but every outburst is just a sign that I care too deeply about things. Most people ignore. My temper is sharp, but it's not hatred. It's a mirror of all the pain I've swallowed silently for years. I have a bad temper, and sometimes it scares me more than anyone else, because it's a reminder of, my anger is loud, but beneath it is a heart that still believes in kindness, even when it's tested. I have a bad temper, yet I've learned that anger can be a teacher if I listen carefully to it. My temper is a storm, but even storms wash away the dust and make the air clear again. I have a bad temper, but each flare-up is a warning, not a weapon. I only want to be understood. My temper is a part of me that it doesn't define my heart, my compassion, or my ability to forgive. I have a bad temper, yet it's taught me patience, because every outburst reminds me I must choose peace. I lash out sometimes, but it's always because something in me feels deeply unseen. My temper is my loudest voice in a quiet world that often dismisses the quiet ones. I have a bad temper, but it's also a sign that I refuse to settle for injustice or neglect. My anger comes with flare forces me to examine my triggers. I have a bad temper, but it's also proof that I am passionate about life, about truth, and about love. My temper is fiery, yet it teaches me boundaries, reminding me to protect my peace. I have a bad temper, but it's not weakness. It's a one that my heart has limits like anyone else. My anger is intense, but so is my capacity to heal, to apologize, and to grow. I have a bad temper, but it's a window into my soul, showing both my struggles and my strength. My temper flares, but it's often the result of caring too much about people who don't notice. I have a bad temper, yet it has taught me the value of quiet, reflection, and self-control over time. My anger sometimes scares people, but it also draws who are brave enough to understand me. I have a bad temper, and that truth makes my moments of calm and joy all the more powerful. My temper is strong, but it doesn't erase my ability to love, to empathize, and to forgive endlessly. I have a bad temper, but beneath every outburst lies a heart, desperately seeking connection. My anger is real, but it's never permanent. It fades when I remember what truly matters. I have a bad temper, yet each flare reminds me that I am alive, passionate, and unwilling to settle. My temper is fierce, but it coexists with tenderness that most people rarely see. I have a bad temper, but it has made me self-aware, forcing me to confront my fears and insecurities. My anger can explode, yet it's often the loudest way I express love I cannot contain. I have a bad temper, but it has shaped me, teaching resilience and the importance of accountability. My temper is intense, yet it is tempered by reflection, by moments of silence, and by patience. Learn painfully. I have a bad temper, but I've learned to channel it into energy that builds rather than destroys. My anger is visible, but my remorse, my understanding, and my empathy are even stronger. I have a bad temper, but it's also proof that I refuse to stay silent when life demands honesty. My temper is like a wildfire, but even fire can warm and light the way if controlled. I have a bad temper, yet each outburst pushes me to understand myself and others more deeply. My anger sometimes isolates me, but it also clarifies what I truly value in life. I have a bad temper, and that intensity has made me both vulnerable and unshakably strong at the same time. My temper is my loud heart speaking, demanding recognition, compassion, and understanding from the world. I have a bad temper, yet I've learned that patience is the skill that transforms rage into wisdom. My anger is undeniable, but so is my desire to grow, forgive, and reconnect. I have a bad temper, but it teaches me boundaries and the importance of protecting my mental space. My temper is a reflection of my values, passion, integrity, and a refusal to accept betrayal. I have a bad temper, yet it has revealed who truly matters and who drifts away when things get real. My anger is sometimes messy, but my reflection after, it is always clear and honest. I have a bad temper, and it has been my toughest teacher, forcing me to confront my own flaws. My temper flares, but every flare is an invitation to self-awareness and transformation. I have a bad temper, yet it cannot overshadow the love, kindness, and patience I cultivate daily.